Welcome back. And so this is the next review test. We did this for test number 1, and I'm going to do this for the midterm exam as well, in which I go through and answer hopefully most of your questions about the test. And I'm doing this so that we don't have to spend so much class time on it. But obviously, in class, if you have any follow-up questions about these, go ahead and ask them. And so I'm going to do the first 6 slide identifications as one video, and then the next set. So we will start with number 1. First off, I want to remind you that on the last midterm test, the images were in counter-chronological order, meaning starting from the most recent to going to the most distant. I did that as a way to help you with dating, although I don't think it necessarily helped everybody, but it did seem to help some in some decisions they made. I'm not going to cover every information about the piece. Obviously, it's written right there on the screen, Portrait of Ross, so you can see that. So I'm not going to say that for each piece, either the name of the work or the name of the artist. I'm just going to tell you maybe 2, sometimes maybe 3 things about the work that you could have said in addition for credit. So you could describe this as a work of sculpture, or as an installation, or both, to fulfill the answer to that extra question, the 4th part of the question. And if you wanted to get any extra credit points, you could describe the basic meaning and how this work works, right? That it functions like a clock, that as each person who comes to visit the piece and they're instructed to take a piece of candy, and it's designed in such a way based on its size and so forth, that when each person visits and takes a piece of candy, by the time it's done, it is estimated that Ross, this is a portrait of Ross, that Ross will have died because Ross had a terminal disease. He was dying of AIDS. Okay? All right, we're going to move on. I want to go do this quickly. But like I said before, if you have more questions, you want more information on any piece, just ask me. So, the Vietnam War Memorial, and you could describe it as a work of sculpture. I would also accept if you described it as a work of architecture. After all, she was an architecture student when she produced the design for this, or even a work of landscape architecture. It is really kind of fits multiple descriptions, but fundamentally it's a work of sculpture. And then once again, for extra credit, I think you could talk about how it functions. Once again, like how by walking up to it and walking down into it, you're kind of like entering this large wound in the earth, and it's like a timeline that as you're going through the piece, you're experiencing the cost of the war, because the people, the names, the list, right, keeps growing in size until it expands so much larger than you, so that you begin at the start experiencing just a small amount of deaths, per time period, but as you get to the very bottom of it, it's overwhelming the cost of the war. Okay, yellow and green brush strokes. A number of people made a mistake. I think a lot of people can see the dots kind of clearly on the background, and they don't realize that actually all of the colors are painted in that dot by dot method. But anyway, it's painting, so that could be it. That's all you need to say, is that it's a painting. And in terms of extra information, the main thing that I talked about was how you can interpret this work as kind of a parody or a mocking of the ambitions of the expressionists in terms of their desire to make paintings all about gesture and about expressiveness. And here is this extremely energetic and expressive brushstroke, but it's not made by an expressive mark at all, right? It's made by a very calculated mechanical process. Okay. Excavation, also a painting, so right there, it's an oil painting, so you could get points there. And one of the main things, we talked about this in a number of different ways. I talked about it in terms of its process of creation, how the artist got to this looking painting by the fact of being frustrated with previous layers, and he started to scrape it down yet one more time, and then finding this new kind of combination where these layers were peeking through, started to create a kind of a new kind of painting for him. And so, literally, in a way, that the name Excavation is literally him kind of, in a way, carving into his own history, excavating his own past as an artist. And so, another thing that we talked about with this painting is how how the eye reads it, the visual pathways built into it, and how for this painting you can't just see it as a whole. It's so kind of disjointed and so overall. You have to take a lot of time to look at it and let your eye kind of meander and wander. And it's like the thing it feels when you first see it as a painting with almost no hierarchy and organization whatsoever, and you have to really kind of sit and look at it for a while for those hierarchies and organizations of shapes and marks, repetition of color, for them to start to kind of make sense and start to come through. And it is one of these paintings where every time I look at it and I stare at it for another 3 minutes, I see a whole host of new images, new ideas to discuss. Okay. Degas, Edward Degas. The name is down here, right there. It's a pastel drawing or a pastel painting. Doesn't matter which one you describe it as, but if you described it as an oil painting, you probably would have had points taken off. If you described it just as a painting, I think I would have given you an okay. And what are some of the things we talked about? Well, most recently we talked about how it creates space, how it's creating space without a perspective system, just using repetition or overlap of shapes and change of scale, primarily as a way of making space. We also talked about it in terms of composition, how it's a composition that's kind of like a graceful balance of dissonance. There are lots of places in the composition where we have these very kind of interesting awkwardnesses, lines coming very close to other lines, but then not quite touching. All right. La Meninas, and it's an oil painting. It's a Baroque oil painting, so you would have gotten points and maybe even a little bit of extra credit point right there just by saying Baroque oil painting. And it's a painting which is a painting about painting, right? In that, in the painting, the artist himself is in there and he's working on a giant painting similar to the one that we're looking at, but it's probably not the same painting. And as we're looking at this painting, we are put in the position of the people standing for a portrait, which it appears that we are in the position of the king and queen of Spain. If we're not in that exact position, we're standing very close to them. And so that's a very interesting thing about how the painting makes us become a participant in it. We become a part of the story. And the story is this kind of unfolding mystery that's never fully explained. The painting is titled La Menina, so clearly the maids of honor who are attending to the princess are very important in the painting. She is standing there primarily to amuse us. So I think that's enough. Okay, that is the end of the first video. I will get to you with the second video, and we'll cover slides 7 through 12.